Creating scale in nature and landscape photography is one of the most difficult aspects to get correct. But the good thing is, once we know how to do it and understand the benefits behind it, it sets our photography away from being an amateur to that more professional feel. We've already done this in the previous parts of this course without even realizing. Photographing cities or photographing churches, as you can see right now, this is a way to indicate the scale inside of landscape photography. Because if we're photographing like we have previously inside this course, this beautiful cave right in front of me, we can't tell the size of the cave because obviously the person not looking at the image or not capturing the image was never there. So as photographers, we're trying to portray scale inside of our photography to someone that wasn't there. And they look at this image, they're going to feel the scale, the adventure, or what it felt like to be there. But previously we photographed the churches and the cities. But sometimes we come out in nature and there's nothing around. So we can't obviously create that scale because if I was to photograph with this tree right in front of me, you have no idea how big this tree is. So what I'm going to do right now is run down into the middle of the cave and stand there for scale. This is not traditional landscape photography, but for me, I feel that it really adds a sense of scale and also adventure. If someone was looking at this image, it can give them an indication of what it felt like to be there standing in that location. And also secondly, we as humans know how tall generally humans are to give that representation of scale of what we're trying to achieve in this type of photography. So with composition, we're basically going to photograph the cave as we've previously done inside of this course. We're also going to exposure bracket, which we learned previously inside this course at this location. But right now, the one thing I want to change is the focusing point because we've spoken previously about focusing and how we want to make sure the subject in the image, which is now going to be me, is razor sharp, the sharpest possible inside of this composition. So I'm still shooting at f8, exposure bracketing for 3, so +2, 1, and 0, like we've previously done inside this course, 160 ISO. I'm going to set a 10-second timer and then run down inside the image and capture this image and stand very still. So I'm going to show you now the previous image that we've captured at this location. And it looks very good and you can tell that it's a nature and landscape image. But what it's missing is that sense of scale, which is what we're trying to achieve in this advanced composition. So now if I blend myself over top of this image, you can see the cave becomes a lot bigger and it adds depth into the image. So yes, we're creating scale, but we're also creating depth in the image because we've got a human element or a sense of scale in this. So whenever you can, or you're missing an element, so we haven't got as much light here, I can add a human element in there to get that sense of scale. And that's the third element we need to capture our nature and landscape images. It's a great way to set yourself apart if you haven't got something in the environment. In this lesson, I want to show you how you can create beautiful and simple images using minimalistic photography. We're out photographing just after sunrise, and although we haven't got those perfect conditions for sunrise that we're used to shooting, we've got very heavy fog. And using minimalistic photography with different focal ranges and orientation, any beginner photographer can create unique and stunning images from any nature and landscape scene. So in front of me, I've got a church with a beautiful reflection image. We're going to be creating just a very simple and minimalistic image of the church, utilizing the conditions we have, very heavy fog. Although minimalistic images don't have to be just with heavy fog, there are other ways we can create these minimalistic, unique images, but I'm going to touch on that later in this lesson. So right now I'm framed up in landscape orientation and I want to shoot around that 35 millimeters. But unfortunately the composition doesn't work very well because I've got the middle of the church and the reflection in the middle of the image. And remember, we want to try and get those key subjects on 1/3 of those rule of thirds that we explained earlier inside of this course. So I'm going to go through and take an image in landscape to make sure when we go home we can play around with it in the editing software just to learn from our composition skills. Now one thing about the composition is I've got this tree on the right hand side here and I have to choose whether I want to implement this into my composition or get rid of it. And the way I can do that is simply just by using the different focal range, so between 23 and 35 millimeters. I'm breaking that other rule of thirds. So I spoke about the one rule of third, putting the church in the verticals, but in the horizontal, I want to put the reflection dead smack in the middle. So we're going to go through and do that right now. Now, if I want to put this tree in the composition, I'm shooting at 23 millimeters, and you can see that image right now. Although it is a very nice image, we're trying to create minimalistic photography. So what I'm going to try and do now is switch my camera into vertical composition to see what we can come up with here. And what this is going to allow me to do is use a larger focal range. So rather than shooting that 23 mil quite wide open, we're going to recompose, and we're going to now go to the end of our focal range, and this is the same. We're putting that 1 rule of third of the church on the right-hand side and the reflection perfectly in the middle. Now, I can go through now, and I'm composed almost at 50 millimeters. So we're compressing and also eliminating what is in the composition. So I can go through and take this image right now, as you can see, and it creates a lot more minimalistic photography. So what is minimalistic photography? It's basically getting all the clutter out of the composition and using the conditions that you have. So today we have fog, and you can go through and get really heavy fog and just concentrate on subjects, breaking that rule of third, putting things on the horizon line and dead smack in the middle, as you can see of Lake Bled Island right now. It's breaking those rule of thirds from the conditions you've got. But you can also create minimalistic photography by using telephoto photography. So eliminating all that clutter and just concentrating on one subject, whether it's a castle or whether it's a little cottage in the middle of nowhere. We can create these beautiful minimalistic images by using telephoto or the heavy fog that we have around us. Another way to go through and create minimalistic photography with the conditions that you haven't got is by using long exposure. We've touched about using ND filters previously inside this course, so you can make your own minimalistic images by making the clouds move or flattening out the water if there's ripples in the water, and even changing it to black and white is another great way to make minimalistic images. So you can see any beginner photographer can go out and utilize the conditions we have to create minimalistic, unique, and beautiful images of any nature and landscape.